Perfect, Arslan.
Nietzsche Chapter 1, 1000 words, setup phase, calm, reflective, Titanic diary style. Chapter Oni voyage prepared. In April 1912, the RMS Titanic represented the pinnacle of maritime engineering and human ambition. Far from a story of reckless pride, her construction and outfitting were methodical, deliberate, and guided by accumulated knowledge of transatlantic travel. The ship was designed not to be invincible but to function as a complex, interdependent system capable of managing known risks through meticulous preparation and procedural rigor. Southampton Harbor was a scene of disciplined activity. Crews moved with precision, loading supplies, inspecting machinery, and ensuring that all systems operated as intended. Passengers embarked in an orderly fashion, their classes determining access and accommodations, yet the scale of the operation was remarkable in its efficiency. Each movement reflected organization rather than improvisation, and confidence was derived from routine rather than assumption. Titanic's design included numerous safety features, from watertight compartments to lifeboat drills, not as symbols of infallibility but as practical tools to extend the ship's capacity to endure unforeseen events. Each element of preparation reflected careful attention to detail. The vessel was a floating system of responsibilities, a microcosm of human organization applied to the challenges of the Atlantic. Onboard life followed established routines. Passengers occupied decks, promenade, and dined according to schedules that mirrored smaller vessels yet were magnified by the Titanic scale. Even third-class accommodations offered relative comfort compared to previous ships. Confidence among passengers was experiential, grounded in observation of order and efficiency rather than in verbal assurances of safety. Crew hierarchy emphasized responsibility and repetition. Officers coordinated movements, engineers monitored engines, and deckhands executed tasks according to defined procedures. This structure ensured operational continuity, allowing the ship to function as an integrated whole. Each decision and movement was guided by training and protocol rather than improvisation, creating a calm, dependable environment. The North Atlantic, known for seasonal ice, was regarded as navigable. Navigation charts, ice reports, and standard operating procedures allowed officers to anticipate potential hazards. Mariners relied on observation and disciplined response rather than assuming control over nature. The ocean was a variable to be managed, not a theatrical force to heighten suspense. This chapter introduces the environment before the iceberg became a factor. The subtle hook is the understanding that despite meticulous preparation, the voyage would inevitably encounter environmental limits. Confidence was procedural, systems were attentive, yet nature remained indifferent. The story's progression is built on anticipation grounded in reality rather than dramatization. Wireless operators worked amidst the hum of early 20th century technology, transmitting passenger messages and monitoring communications from other vessels. Ice warnings were received and logged, part of a constant stream of operational data. Officers interpreted each message within the context of established protocols, reinforcing the notion that human systems functioned within predictable, disciplined frameworks. The Titanic's size contributed both capability and complexity. Coordinated operations across departments, from engineering to navigation, demonstrated interdependence and careful oversight. Crew and machinery acted as an interconnected system, each component contributing to the collective reliability of the voyage. Passengers were largely unaware of these underlying complexities. Their perception of security was shaped by visible order, illuminated decks, smooth operations, attentive staff. Confidence aboard the Titanic was experiential, grounded in observable calm rather than sensational claims. The emotional tone is calm, reflective, and human-centered. There is no foreshadowed disaster, no dramatic tension. Systems function, routines persist, and environmental awareness guides decision-making. The narrative lays the groundwork for the unfolding story of complication, escalation, and consequence. By the end of the first chapter, the Titanic was underway. Systems and personnel operated as an integrated whole. Observation and communication were continuous. Routine remained intact. Confidence was procedural. The foundation for subsequent chapters, where environmental and operational variables would gradually converge, was firmly established. Information without urgency. As the Titanic sailed steadily into the North Atlantic, subtle shifts began to influence the voyage. Icebergs, reported by other ships, appeared intermittently on wireless logs. These were not emergencies but data points, observations that officers and crew incorporated into their continuous evaluation of conditions. The environment remained manageable, yet the accumulation of information began to narrow options, introducing complication through structure rather than dramatic tension. Wireless operators balanced passenger communications with operational messages. Ice warnings arrived consistently, noted and logged with procedural precision. These messages were interpreted within the framework of routine maritime practice. Officers considered each report, assessed relevance, and made course adjustments when deemed necessary. The emphasis was on informed judgment rather than reactive panic. On the bridge, the officers' actions were methodical. They cross-referenced charts, updated navigation logs, and monitored the ship's heading and speed relative to known ice locations. Decisions were grounded in precedent and training, demonstrating the disciplined management of risk. The vessel continued its course, operationally sound, with crew performing duties according to established protocols. Passengers remained largely unaware of the accumulating environmental factors. Daily routines, meals, promenades, conversation, continued undisturbed. Confidence aboard the ship was maintained through visible order, attentive staff, and the smooth execution of daily operations. This calm human-centered perspective is essential to the documentary style, emphasizing inevitability rather than dramatization. Ice, partially submerged, created a challenge for detection. Lookouts worked with diligence, yet natural limitations, darkness, calm seas and subtle contrasts, constrained visibility. Officers relied on both direct observation and incoming wireless messages to make informed adjustments. The gradual accumulation of potential hazards illustrates complication as a process rather than a sudden event. Historically, this phase demonstrates how complex systems respond to incremental pressures. The Titanic's crew operated efficiently within design parameters, yet environmental factors introduced variables outside complete human control. This combination set the stage for escalation without requiring narrative exaggeration. Crew coordination was structured. Officers delegated tasks, engineers maintained machinery, and deckhands followed routine procedures. Each individual's actions were part of a layered system that ensured continuity. The Titanic functioned as an interdependent organism, each role reinforcing the others to maintain stability. Environmental awareness shaped operational decisions. Reports of drifting ice required monitoring and periodic course adjustments. Crew members interpreted signals carefully, balancing caution with operational efficiency. The interplay between human judgment and environmental data defines this phase. Complication is not dramatic, it is logical, cumulative, and procedural. Passengers' experience reflected calm perception. While the crew managed subtle changes, the voyage appeared routine to those on board. Confidence stemmed from observable order rather than the absence of risk. The narrative emphasizes the human-centered perspective, highlighting that historical progression often unfolds quietly and inevitably. By the chapter's conclusion, the Titanic had encountered the first meaningful constraints imposed by environment and information. Ice warnings had been received, logged, and evaluated. Visibility conditions introduced limitations on perception. Crew and systems operated efficiently within these constraints. The foundation for escalation was established. Conditions were manageable yet narrowing, preparing for the eventual convergence of human action and environmental consequence. This chapter completes the progression from preparation to complication. The Titanic's operational systems functioned as designed, human behavior remained disciplined, and environmental factors imposed limits that were beginning to shape the trajectory of events. Calm, reflective, and human-centered, this chapter sets the stage for the next phase, escalation. The ice becomes visible. As the night deepened, subtle environmental changes began to shape the voyage. The calm seas and moonless sky, which had previously aided predictability, now concealed hazards. Icebergs, partially submerged and drifting in the North Atlantic, gradually became discernible against the dark horizon. The escalation in this chapter is measured, arising from natural conditions rather than human error or sensationalized drama. Lookouts in the crow's nest and foremast scanned the horizon systematically, their binoculars and trained eyes seeking shapes barely distinguishable from the surrounding darkness. Initial impressions were cautious. Distant ice required confirmation before officers could take action. This careful observation exemplified procedural vigilance, demonstrating how escalation arises not suddenly but through cumulative environmental cues. On the bridge, officers interpreted incoming reports and visual confirmation according to maritime protocol. Adjustments to course and speed were considered with deliberation. Every decision reflected experience, precedent, and the limitations imposed by the ship's mass and momentum. Operational responses remained calm and precise, illustrating the Titanic's reliance on disciplined judgment in the face of narrowing safety margins. Passengers remained largely unaware of the subtle shift in conditions. Promenades continued, meals were served, and social interactions carried on without disruption. Confidence aboard the Titanic was derived from visible order and functional routines. This human-centered perspective emphasizes that escalation often occurs quietly, with cumulative pressures building beneath the surface of apparent normality. The ice itself presented nuanced challenges. Its low profile above the waterline and the reflective calm of the sea made early detection difficult. Lookouts and officers had to interpret partial information, anticipating the iceberg's size and trajectory. These constraints defined the gradual nature of escalation. Risk was present, growing, yet remained manageable through disciplined observation. Operational systems functioned without interruption. Engines maintained speed, steering mechanisms responded to orders, and wireless operators continued to process communications. Crew coordination, hierarchical yet flexible, allowed the ship to respond systematically to subtle environmental pressures. Escalation emerged not from system failure but from the decreasing margin for precise maneuvering. Historically, this chapter demonstrates how incremental pressures accumulate within complex operations. Icebergs were visible, and Titanic systems allowed responsive action, yet environmental limitations imposed constraints beyond human control. The narrowing margin for safe response represents a natural escalation consistent with historical reality. Crew responsibility was distributed across multiple layers. Officers guided course adjustments, engineers executed speed changes, and lookouts reported observations continuously. The ship functioned as a complex system, each component reinforcing the others. Human action and environmental variables converged to create subtle tension, entirely procedural and grounded in reality. The emotional tone remains reflective and calm. Passengers perceive continuity and safety. Crew members act with focus rather than alarm. The audience's understanding of escalation is built on inevitability and observation, not dramatization. Each choice, observation, and adjustment is an extension of prior preparation and cumulative knowledge. By the end of this chapter, the iceberg had become fully visible to trained eyes. The ship's course required precise adjustments, and the operational margin had narrowed. All systems continued to function, yet the constraints imposed by environment demanded meticulous coordination. Escalation is complete in terms of environmental and operational challenge, maintaining calm and historically grounded narrative tone. This chapter deepens the audience's understanding of inevitability. The iceberg's presence and the ship's response illustrate how calm, disciplined procedures confront the limits of nature. The stage is now set for the turning point, the collision that will transform potential risk into tangible consequence. Collision of expectation and environment. As the night unfolded, the iceberg that had gradually approached Titanic became fully apparent in the ship's path. Calm seas and moonless darkness, previously aiding predictability, now limited reaction time. The vessel's systems, crew, and operational protocols were tested against environmental realities, creating the turning point in the voyage where potential risk transitioned into consequence. Lookouts first confirmed the iceberg's proximity. Their disciplined observation, honed through routine, allowed officers to issue precise orders. Engine commands were executed to reduce speed, and the helm adjusted carefully. Each movement reflected procedural rigor, illustrating how human systems operate under sudden but manageable pressure. The turning point emerges not from chaos but from the convergence of preparation and natural limitation. Passenger awareness remained minimal. In dining rooms, promenades, and cabins, life continued according to established routines. Confidence persisted, anchored in observable order and crew composure. The narrative emphasizes human-centered perspective. Operational tension exists for those responsible, while the broader population experiences continuity and calm. The iceberg's dimensions extended far below the waterline, a reminder of unseen complexity in natural phenomena. Officers and engineers interpreted limited visual data, anticipating impact and response. Structural design, including watertight compartments, provided resilience but within defined limits. The turning point illustrates the inevitable meeting of human planning and environmental constraint. Wireless operators continued to relay and receive messages, providing context and situational awareness. Previously routine ice warnings now informed real-time operational decisions. Communication maintained integration between observation, judgment, and action, demonstrating that discipline and preparation guide outcomes even under emergent circumstances. Adjustments required precise coordination. Rudder commands, engine reversals, and helm adjustments were executed under tight constraints. Crew training ensured consistent implementation, yet physical and environmental limitations dictated outcomes. The collision reflects how human competence and environmental factors converge to produce historical turning points. Emotionally, the chapter remains calm and reflective. There is no dramatized panic. Crew members act with discipline, passengers perceive continuity, and the audience understands inevitability as the collision arises naturally from preceding conditions. The Titanic systems and personnel continue to function, yet the iceberg imposes undeniable consequences. From a historical perspective, the collision was neither sudden nor unexpected. Ice had been observed and reported, environmental conditions were known, procedural responses were implemented. The turning point is a convergence of preparation and limitation rather than dramatic failure, illustrating how historically significant events can unfold quietly yet inevitably. By the end of this chapter, the iceberg had made physical contact with Titanic. Structural integrity was compromised incrementally, systems continued to operate, and crew response remained disciplined. The turning point is fully realized. The interaction between expectation, preparation, and environmental reality produces tangible consequences that define the remainder of the voyage. This chapter completes the transition from escalation to consequence. The ship's preparation and operational discipline met environmental challenge, demonstrating reflective inevitability. The stage is now set for resolution, where outcomes are realized, consequences unfold, and historical understanding deepens. Aftermath and reflection. The night after collision, the Titanic situation transitioned from procedural challenge to the realization of consequences. Though designed to endure damage through watertight compartments, the impact of the iceberg exceeded structural limits, initiating flooding in multiple sections. Crew and passengers confronted the reality of vulnerability, not as dramatic panic but as a series of operational and human responses unfolding with inevitability. Officers assessed the situation methodically. Damage reports from watertight compartments were collated, engineering staff communicated precise measurements of flooding, and navigational adjustments were considered carefully. Procedures dictated lifeboat deployment, passenger organization, and communication. The focus remained on order, efficiency, and minimizing chaos. In this chapter, the resolution is built from disciplined response rather than sensationalized reaction. Crew members guided passengers toward lifeboats with calm authority. Procedures were executed according to pre-established roles. Signals and instructions were delivered clearly, reinforcing trust in organizational competence. Emotional tone remained measured, humans responding to circumstances with deliberate attention rather than dramatized fear. The narrative reflects the Titanic diary style, emphasizing inevitability, reflection, and the human-centered nature of historical events. Passenger experience was varied yet unified in a subtle understanding of the situation. Third-class passengers faced logistical challenges in reaching lifeboats, while first- and second-class passengers relied on procedural guidance to organize evacuation. Social hierarchies influenced interaction but did not undermine collective focus on survival. The emotional atmosphere was composed, reflective, and centered on human decision-making under stress. Wireless operators relayed messages to nearby ships, ensuring that communication channels remained active. Reports were precise, factual, and procedural. Operators continued to transmit without sensationalization, emphasizing that human systems functioned as designed even amidst crisis. These communications illustrate how structured response can extend influence beyond immediate environment. Engineering teams worked tirelessly, pumping and monitoring water levels, adjusting steam pressure, and maintaining propulsion to extend operational margin. Their efforts exemplify the disciplined application of technical knowledge under environmental constraints. Even as structural limits were reached, human actions sought to preserve order and mitigate consequences. Historically, the resolution phase demonstrates inevitability. The collision's consequences were unavoidable once environmental factors and operational limits intersected. Yet human response shaped the scale of outcomes. Orderly evacuation, maintenance of morale, and measured decision-making define the historical narrative. This calm progression highlights that consequence is often determined as much by human systems as by external events. Emotionally, the narrative remains reflective. There is no dramatized hysteria, there is only measured action, observation, and the gradual realization of limits. Passengers experienced fear tempered by instruction and guidance. Crew acted in accordance with training. Systems functioned to their maximum capacity, yet environmental realities dictated outcomes. By the chapter's conclusion, the Titanic had begun its descent into the Atlantic. Lifeboats carried organized groups of passengers to safety, while crew members coordinated ongoing efforts to preserve order. The ship's final moments were an interplay of human discipline, engineering, and environmental inevitability. Historical reflection emphasizes the continuity of human response, the limits of technology, and the impartiality of natural forces. This chapter completes the narrative arc, from preparation to complication, escalation, turning point, and resolution. The voyage's progression illustrates how structured human systems confront environmental challenges, how disciplined response mitigates consequences, and how inevitability shapes historical understanding. Emotional tone remains calm, reflective, and human-centered, allowing the audience to perceive events as both inevitable and historically grounded.